Okay, we are looking at Unit 1 and the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to take a look now at the immigration and why immigration was such a big part of the Industrial Revolution of the late 19th century. So, we've talked about the government making a decision to move forward with allowing business to pretty much do whatever they want. That term laissez-faire, hands off, do whatever you want. And um, oops, yep. So let's take a look and okay, I am struggling. There we go. We're going to take a look at, first of all, who immigrated to the United States, but why did they have to come? We have a lot of workers, we have a lot of people in the United States. Couldn't they have just done it? No, they couldn't have, because we don't have enough machinery. It's done, the assembly line that Henry Ford's going to introduce into these factories is still going to be used with people. So we need more people. You don't have enough native people living here, so you go to the South and you say, hey, we'll take the African American and some of the Mexican workers to come up. That's not enough. So then you say we'll take women, and that's not enough. And then you take children, and that's still not enough. So then we make the welcome, all welcome sign from the world to come in here. And who is the people we got? Well, there's going to be two distinct time periods. One is before 1890. So again, this Industrial Revolution, sometime after the Civil War, up until about 1890, is mostly Northern and Western Europe. That means Great Britain, Ireland, Germany. These are all blue-eyed, blonde-haired, for the most part, English-speaking people. They look like, quote-unquote, the native person. After 1890, though, it's going to turn because Europe is going to have better economic situation, so a lot of those people are going to stay, but some of the people from the southern part of Europe and the eastern part of Europe, Italy, Austria, Hungary, Russia, Czechoslovakia, a lot of the Slavic countries towards the Mediterranean, Greece, those guys are going to come. Now, these guys are more darker complexion. They don't speak English, and so they don't fit the quote-unquote native person. In the West, you have Asian and Mexican immigrants, Asia being China, Japan, and Mexico. But as we'll see here in just a little bit, that's going to stop in the 1882 with China, and then in 1905 with Japan. These come in much smaller numbers. And again, Chinese guys, Japanese guy, and Mexico guy doesn't look like blue-eyed, blonde-haired, blonde-haired person. The Chinese and Japanese are not Christian. They're not Anglo-Saxon, whether it be Catholic or Protestant. Mexican guy is, but he looks different. So we don't like those guys as much. Why in the world do these people come to the United States? Well, they're going to come to the United States just like they came to the United States in the 16th and 17th century. Many of them are escaping religious persecution. Specifically, in large droves, the Jewish population of Eastern and Southern Europe are going to be escaping these religious persecutions within Russia, these pogroms, groups of programs that are being instituted against the Jews. And they're going to come in mass droves in the later part of the 19th century and in the early 20th century. And Americans are going to get tired of them too. In fact, we're going to turn a great many of them around and say in the 1920s, we don't want you because the Europe didn't want them, and we say we don't want you. And so they were forced to go back to 1920s, back to Germany, back to Russia, where they were being persecuted and killed. That's a tough one. But they come here because the rising population in Europe, religious persecution, and they want to start a new independent life. Again, you're able to start over. Your political status, your economic status is going to be elevated potentially. And you're not going to get that in lots of parts of uh, Europe. What did it take to actually get into the United States? Well, it was pretty simple. Ellis Island, make sure you star that, underline that. Those are all the immigrants coming from Europe. So the vast majority, 90% of all of our immigrants at the turn of the 20th century are coming from Europe. Okay? They had a very small list of what you had to do. You had to pass a physical examination. So we weren't going to let somebody come into the United States that had the whooping cough or that was, really, really sick with measles, mumps, those kinds of things. We weren't going to let them come in. We did have to have documentation of where they had come from. We needed to verify that they had come from a country that we recognized. That's still true today. That's still something that President Trump has come back in his first year of being president, is to say, I'm not going to take some of these people from some of these countries like Syria, where there is no established government that you can verify that this person is who he says he is. There's just total chaos over there in Syria and other countries within Africa and in the United States. Now, his people that were against that would say, no, you're only targeting Muslims. And President Trump would say, well, these countries that they're coming from, whether it be Syria, Libya, are just so much chaos in those countries, they wouldn't let them come in because we couldn't verify where they were from. They also had to pass a literacy test in their own native language. Okay, so we weren't going to let in mentally retarded people. And finally, they had to have $25, which in the 1910 was a chunk of change. A lot of immigrants didn't have $25. This is an interesting stat, though. From 1892 to 1943, 16 million immigrants came through Ellis Island. That's a bunch. That's sometimes up to 11,000 a day. Angel Island. Angel Island is where all the Asian immigrants and all South American immigrants had to come through. They came through Angel Island, which is in San Francisco. Now, Angel Island is much different than Ellis Island. Angel Island, we have really, really stringent questions. We will hold you in holding tanks for 2, 3, 6 months. Very much more persecuted and questioned and doubted. Why? American guy doesn't want Asian guy in our country, and they're treated a lot worse. And you're going to see in just a second again how we really will curtail that here in the 1880s. Was everyone excited about immigration? Well, kind of like today. How's everybody doing with all the people moving in from California into the Idaho? So before we want to cast all this, whoa, these people were all racist people, I just ask yourself, how's everybody doing with everyone coming from California? You may not openly say it, you may not even really have that much harsh feelings about it, but you may, when it's 5 o'clock at night and you're out on the traffic, you go, gosh, we've got a lot of new people coming into this state. So what was the problem with it was that a lot of people were saying we're no longer America, we're this other nationality, whether it be Irish or Italian. And so what was the idea was that people would come into our country and they would meld in with America, and that they would abandon their language and they were expected to speak English, and that their customs would become American. And so you would celebrate the 4th of July, you would celebrate Thanksgiving, because that's an American holiday. And by and large, that was the case. People were glad to come here, but they were persecuted, they were put down, but you were expected to speak English. Today, a lot of the people in our country today still have reservations about, you're in America, I expect you to speak English. I'm not going to speak fill in the blank. I'm not going to speak Spanish. I'm not going to speak Russian. You're going to speak English because we're in America. And that does cause still some tension today. Some of the immigrants did not want to give up their cultural identity, and they did not meld in with America. They moved to certain parts of New York or certain parts of Philadelphia, of San Francisco, and they established who they were, and they wanted to live in a neighborhood, and they didn't become a part of America. They were just a small entity of whatever country they came to, and that's still happening some today. This is going to give rise to what's called nativism. And nativism is those people that live here, that have been here, i.e., I'll use the example of, again, Idaho. People that have been in Idaho, born here, or been here quite a long time, they believe they're superior to these Californians or people moving into our state. So here we go with the quote one more time. We're going to give favoritism to Americans. That's what nativism is going to do. We're against immigrants, so it's anti-immigrant groups. We demand quotas on immigrants, which we will put in place in the 1920s. We'll change that in the 1960s, which we'll take a look at here in a little while. Very interesting how the quotas are set up in the 1960s. They're talking about changing that requirement today. President Trump is. Americans didn't mind if we immigrated from the quote unquote right countries. Again, the blue-eyed, blonde-haired guys, the British, the Germany, the Scandinavian, or Ireland. But we weren't real big on the wrong countries, which were Asian or Slavic countries or Latin countries. We didn't really like that. So, now, what happens with the Chinese and this instance that we came about with not wanting people from Asia? In 1882, we passed the Chinese Exclusionary Act. This was passed by Congress, and this is going to stop all Chinese immigration from coming into our country. Now, it's going to only be a 10-year period, but it's reviewed in 1892, and then in 1902, it's renewed indefinitely. So from 1882 until 1943, virtually zero people from the Asian's coast, and we're talking, when we say Chinese, that means all of Korea, China, Indonesia, all that area did not have anyone come to our country. We didn't want them to come in. They didn't look like white guy. They talked quietly. White guy did not see the value of the Chinese guy. Now, this is pretty much ludicrous, especially since they're the ones, them and the Irish are the two biggest nationalities that made our railroad. But that's what we did. We only allowed certain groups in, like students or teachers, into our country. No permanent immigrants. Then in 1905, we passed the Gentleman's Agreement. What happened in 1905, this is pretty wild, is there was riots in California in the Palo Alto area. That's the Silicon Valley today. Very, very well-to-do area today. And what was happening was that the people that were living in that area became very defensive and did not like the Japanese people. And in a lot of the schools, people were beating the crap out of the kids in schools. Oh, hang on here. We have a little noise problem. My fan just broke. Houston, we have a problem. Back to the lecture. Back to the lecture. Here we go. So what happened was these riots in Japan led the Japanese government to become very, very upset, and hostilities became a real possibility. The Japanese were saying, we're not going to let you treat our people like this. And so what Roosevelt was able to convince Japan is that, hey, we will treat those people better. Your students here, we'll make sure that the people of San Francisco and the school systems will stop treating your students so bad. But you agree, Japan, not to send any more immigrants over here to our country. So from 1905 until 1945, no immigrants were allowed to come in from Asia. Now, I'm going to ask you, how many immigrants do you think came from Asia in 1945, post-World War II? We allowed them to come in, but what do you think the people felt about the Japanese in 1945? And if you don't know, I'm going to say really, really negatively after World War II, in the treatment of our prisoners and the treatment of our soldiers in the Pacific Theater. So they didn't start coming in probably until the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And yet the Asian population in our country has done extremely well. Extremely well. Question, why? What caused that? Think about that for a little bit, because the standard of living, the highest standard of living in our country, is Asian, then white. So why is that? So that's our immigration, and them coming in. Now, interestingly enough, we don't have a lot of the Hispanic, Mexican workers coming into our country, and we don't have a problem with them as much. We need their farm work. They come in here, they do that. And we don't have a rise in hostility towards them as much. Or at least it never boils over. I think you can make a strong argument to say we didn't treat them very well, but we didn't have that boiling point like you did with some of the other nationalities, the Irish, the Italians, again, those Slavic people, like we did, like those guys. Why is that? Why do you think that was that way? Okay, we're going to stop there, and we're going to go back into now looking at progressivism.